think about that automatic pilot that kicks in pretty much as soon as you wake up. Maybe for you, it's straight to the shower, then coffee, then that instinctive grab for your phone to scan emails.
All before you've really even registered the day begin, right?
Exactly.
Right.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much of our daily existence is truly, dictated by these deeply grooved habits we barely even notice.
It's a huge question.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what we're going to unpack in this deep dive today.
Right.
We'll be exploring the material you sent over, specifically those excerpts from Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit.
Yeah, a fascinating read.
Definitely. And we want to really get under the hood of how these automatic behaviors form and, maybe more importantly, how we can actually influence them.
So the mission today
Is to give you a really comprehensive understanding of these mechanisms based on what Duhigg lays out.
Okay, sounds good. And the book kicks off almost immediately with this really powerful example, Lisa's story.
Right, the woman who quit smoking.
Yeah, and she experienced this incredible kind of domino effect of positive changes. It wasn't just stopping the smoking.
No, it spread outwards.
She started jogging, which then seemed to nudge her eating habits in a healthier direction, improve her sleep.
And even impacted her finances, her long-term planning, everything.
Yeah, she ended up running marathons, going back to school. It's quite the transformation.
And the scientists studying her were really struck by how it all seemed to stem from tackling that one habit, smoking.
They even saw neurological shifts, didn't they, in her brain scans?
Yeah, as these new patterns solidified, it was almost like the new pathways were sort of paving over the old ones.
So for you listening, that initial takeaway is pretty huge. Sometimes focusing on just one key area can have these surprisingly broad positive consequences.
And what's so compelling, I think, is that the catalyst wasn't some big external life event changing everything for her.
No, it wasn't like she won the lottery or something.
Right. The scientists concluded it was the deliberate effort she put in to changing that one specific keystone habit that really unlocked all these other changes.
Keystone habit. We'll definitely come back to that term.
Oh, absolutely. This idea that a single focused change can have such far-reaching effects is a central theme we'll be digging into quite a bit.
Okay, so let's really break down the engine of habit itself. The book introduces this core concept, the habit loop. Can you walk us through the nuts and bolts of this neurological framework?
Certainly. The habit loop is essentially the basic neurological structure underlying every habit we have. It's a three-part cycle.
3 parts, okay.
First, there's the cue. That's the trigger telling your brain, okay, time to launch this particular behavior.
And a cue could be anything.
Almost anything, yeah. A time of day, like 3 p.m., a specific location, say your kitchen, a preceding action, maybe finishing dinner, a particular emotional state, feeling stressed, bored.
Or even just being around certain people.
Exactly. So that's the cue. Second, there's the routine. This is the behavior itself.
The action you take?
Right. It could be physical action, like biting your nails, or a mental process, like worrying, or even an emotional response, like getting defensive.
Okay. Cue, routine, and the third part.
That's the reward.
Yeah.
This is the positive reinforcement your brain gets right after the routine.
The payoff.
The payoff, yeah.
Yeah.
It signals to your brain, hey, this loop, it worked. Remember it. Do it again next time.
So cue, routine, reward, that cycle.
That's the fundamental loop. And understanding that every single habit, even the ones you think are tiny or trivial, operates through this cycle. Well, that's the crucial first step if you want to analyze or maybe change them.
And this isn't just like a theoretical model. The book uses those classic experiments with rats in a maze to really show it in action, right?
Exactly. Those experiments are quite illustrative. Researchers would train rats to navigate a maze. They introduced a distinct click sound that was the cue.
Got it. The trigger.
Then the rat would run through the maze pathways. That's the routine.
Finding its way.
And at the end, there was a piece of chocolate. The reward.
Ah, the good stuff.
The good stuff. Now, initially, when the rats were first learning this, their brain activity was high pretty much the whole time they were in the maze.
Yeah.
They were figuring it out.
Makes sense. Lots of effort.
But as running the maze became a habit, something really interesting happened to their brain activity. It shifted dramatically.
How so?
Researchers saw these big spikes of activity only right at the beginning when the click cue sounded.
Okay.
And then again right at the very end when they got the chocolate reward.
What about during the run itself? The routine?
That's the key part. During the routine, the brain activity significantly decreased. It quieted down.
Wow. So the brain basically went on autopilot.
Precisely. It demonstrates that once a habit is formed, Our brains become much more efficient, conserving energy by automating the routine.
And this brings us to a really interesting part of the brain, the basal ganglia. The book highlights this, saying it's absolutely key in storing and executing these habits, almost separate from conscious thought.
That's exactly right. The basal ganglia are this cluster of older, more sort of primitive neural structures deep inside the brain. They're heavily involved in motor control, learning procedures, how to do things, routine behaviors, and critically for us, habit formation.
And the story of Eugene in the book is just a mind-blowing illustration of this.
It really is. Eugene suffered severe brain damage from an illness, which massively impaired his ability to form new conscious memories. He couldn't remember people he'd just met or things that had just happened for more than a few moments.
A profound memory loss.
Yet, despite this, Eugene was still able to form new habits. His caregivers noticed he started taking these regular walks around his block.
Even though he couldn't consciously remember deciding to go for a walk, or even recall the route.
Exactly. He couldn't tell you where his house was if you asked him directly while he was out. But somehow he'd consistently find his way back home.
That just underscores how deep these habits go, doesn't it? Operating on a different track from our conscious memory system.
It really does. So even if you, listening, struggle with memory in some ways, this suggests you can still build new positive habits by focusing on those cues and routines, leveraging this more automatic part of your brain.
What was happening with Eugene? How did he find his way back?
Well, what's fascinating is how the familiar cues in his environment, maybe specific trees at corners, the position of mailboxes, the feel of the pavement under his feet, these consistently triggered the walking routine stored in his basal ganglia.
Even though the memory centers of his brain, the hippocampus and medial temporal lobe, were badly damaged.
Precisely. Those parts are crucial for forming memories of events, episodic memories. But the basal ganglia, responsible for the habit, were still functioning.
And this also explained why he'd sometimes eat breakfast multiple times, right?
Yes. The cue, maybe the morning light, the sound of his radio, the smell of coffee, would automatically trigger the routine of going to the kitchen, preparing food, eating.
Regardless of whether he consciously remembered having just eaten or even if he was physically hungry.
Exactly. It highlights a key function of the basal ganglia, conserving mental energy. It takes over these routine behaviors, freeing up our conscious mind, our prefrontal cortex, for more demanding tasks like problem solving or planning.
It's almost a little unsettling, isn't it? How powerfully and automatically these cues can trigger routines, even without conscious awareness.
It really drives home the point. Habits often operate largely unconsciously, exerting this strong pull on our behavior without us even realizing it in the moment.
That's a huge takeaway for you listening. Your brain is constantly scanning for these cue routine reward patterns to automate things and save energy.
And the fast food example in the book shows how these loops can form almost unintentionally.
Right. It's not usually a big family meeting deciding, let's eat fast food 3 times a week.
No, it often starts as an occasional convenience. A busy night, tired after work, kids are hungry. Those are the cues.
And the reward is quick, cheap, tasty food. Problem solved for tonight.
Exactly. But repeat that pattern enough times, and the repeated cues paired with that immediate reward can quickly forge a really powerful habit loop.
And there's research backing this up.
Yes, studies from places like the University of North Texas and Yale support this. These seemingly minor cues and the immediate gratification they promise can significantly shape our behaviors, often flying under the radar of our conscious decision-making.
But here's a counterpoint the book makes. Even though these habits feel so ingrained, almost unbreakable, they can actually be surprisingly delicate.
That's true. They can be very context-dependent.
Like the example of a regular fast food place closing down. Families didn't necessarily just find another fast food joint.
Right. Some simply started eating at home more often. The disruption of that key environmental cue, the restaurant being there, was enough to break the loop.
So even strong habits rely heavily on those specific triggers. Remove the trigger.
Now, the habit can falter. But because we often aren't consciously aware of these loops operating, we tend to underestimate our own ability to control them.
Which means the vital first step towards making a change
Is learning to really identify the specific cues and the specific rewards that are driving the habits you want to modify. Awareness is key.
Okay, so we have the cue triggering the routine, leading to a reward. That's the basic loop. But the book introduces another absolutely critical element that really fuels this whole process.
Ah, yes. The power of craving.
It's not just about getting the reward, is it? It's about the brain anticipating that reward.
That's a vital distinction. Craving is really the engine driving the habit loop forward. The cue doesn't just passively kick off the routine.
It does something more active.
It actively triggers a neurological craving for the reward that the brain expects to receive.
And Wolfram Schultz's experiments with monkeys really showed this clearly.
Elegantly, yes.
Yeah.
He trained monkeys where a specific colored shape on a screen was the cue.
Okay.
Pulling a lever was the routine.
And the reward?
A squirt of blackberry juice. The monkeys loved it. Now, initially, the dopamine neurons in the monkeys' brains, those involved in pleasure and reward, fired most strongly when they actually got the juice.
Makes sense. Reward arrives. Brain lights up.
But as the habit became deeply ingrained, something remarkable happened. The dopamine spike started to occur not when the reward arrived.
But when?
The moment the monkey saw the cue, the colored shape.
Wow. So the brain learned to anticipate the reward.
Exactly. It showed the brain intensely craving the reward before it was even delivered. The cue itself became neurologically linked to the pleasure of the juice.
It's like the brain shouts, ah, I know this signal, good stuff is coming.
Yeah.
And that feeling, that anticipation becomes the driver.
Precisely. That neurological craving is what powers the loop, making us automatically perform the routine whenever the cue appears.
And this applies to humans too, obviously. The New Mexico study on exercise.
Right, that reinforces the idea. Researchers found that many people who build consistent exercise habits weren't just motivated by abstract long-term health goals.
What drove them then?
They developed a genuine craving for the immediate rewards that feel good. Endorphin rush, maybe, or the simple sense of accomplishment they felt after finishing a workout.
So the cue, maybe putting out their running shoes or a specific time of day, didn't just trigger the run itself.
It also triggered an underlying craving for that anticipated positive feeling.
This really clicks into place when you think about trying to build new habits, positive ones. The book suggests you have to actively identify and really anticipate the reward.
Absolutely crucial. If you're trying to start exercising, you need to consciously focus on and look forward to, say, that refreshing post-workout smoothie or the satisfying feeling of logging your progress. You have to help your brain crave the reward associated with the new routine.
So cultivating that craving is often the missing piece when habits don't stick.
Often, yes. The book gives that great historical example, contrasting early toothpaste ads with Pepsodent's huge success.
Right, early ads weren't working so well.
Not really. They promised clean teeth, whiter teeth, same as Pepsodent, basically. But Pepsodent, guided by the advertising genius Claude Hopkins, did something different.
What was the key?
They deliberately created a craving. Their ads focused on the film, on teeth, something most people could feel, even if they didn't consciously think about it much. That was the cue.
Okay, identify the cue.
Then they promised a very distinct, immediate reward. That tingling, clean feeling after using Pepsodent.
Ah, the tingle. I remember that feeling being emphasized.
Exactly. That tingle became the sensory signal that the toothpaste was working. It was immediate, noticeable, and people began to actively crave that feeling of freshness and cleanliness.
So Hopkins cracked the code. A simple, obvious cue paired with a clear, desirable, and preferably immediate reward that generates craving. Those were his two rules, essentially.
Pretty much. Find a simple cue, clearly define the reward. And the initial failure of Febreze perfectly shows what happens when you miss that reward craving link.
Febreze failed initially. I thought it was always huge.
Nope. Procter & Gamble developed this amazing technology that could genuinely eliminate almost any odor. Their first marketing campaigns hammered on this odor elimination benefit.
Sounds logical. Product eliminates odors. Tell people it eliminates odors.
Logical, but it flopped. The problem was, people didn't really crave odorlessness.
How come?
Well, think about it. If your house doesn't smell bad, there's no strong cue triggering a desire for odor removal. And the absence of a bad smell isn't very tangible or satisfying. People weren't noticing the lack of odor as a reward.
Right, you don't notice something that isn't there. So how did they turn Febreze around?
The breakthrough came when P&G researchers realized they needed to tie the product to a different, more tangible, more universally desired reward.
What did they do?
They shifted the marketing. They started positioning Febreze not just as an odor eliminator, but as the final touch after cleaning. The little flourish that signifies completion.
Ah, so it became part of a cleaning routine.
Exactly. The cue became finishing cleaning a room. The routine was spraying Febreze. And the reward became that satisfying feeling of accomplishment. Ah, everything is truly fresh and clean now. A pleasant scent was added to provide that immediate sensory confirmation.
So they manufactured a craving for that feeling of final freshness signaled by the scent.
Precisely. People started associating the cue, finish cleaning, with the anticipated reward, feeling of fresh completion, triggered by spraying Febreze. That created the necessary craving.
Okay, so we've got a solid grasp on the habit loop cue, routine, reward, and the crucial role of craving. But what about changing habits, especially the bad ones? The book introduces Tony Dungy's golden rule of habit change. What's that about?
Dungy's golden rule is surprisingly simple, but incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It states, you can't just extinguish a bad habit. It's very hard to just make it disappear.
So what do you do instead?
The most effective strategy is to keep the original cue and the original reward, but consciously substitute a new routine.
Keep the start and the end, change the middle part.
Essentially, yes. The idea is that the neurological pathway, the craving for that reward triggered by the cue, is already strongly established in your brain. Trying to fight that directly is often a losing battle.
So you redirect the energy instead.
Exactly. You leverage the existing cue and craving, but channel them into a new, more desirable behavior when that familiar cue pops up.
And the book uses Dungy's time coaching the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as a prime example of applying this.
A fantastic example. When Dungy took over the Bucs, they were, well, not great. His approach wasn't about fiery speeches or radical new strategies.
Or was it then?
It was incredibly focused. He meticulously drilled his players on recognizing very specific pre-snap cues from the opposing team.
Tiny details.
Tiny details, yeah. And then he drilled them relentlessly on practiced automatic routines responses to those specific cues.
So for a player like Warren Sapp on the defensive line,
Instead of just reacting vaguely to the ball snap, Dungy trained him to focus intently on, say, the subtle shift in an offensive lineman's weight or the precise angle of their feet.
yeah.
Those were the cues.
And the routine was a specific pass rush, move, or run defense technique tied to that cue.
Exactly. Players like Derek Brooks and Rondé Barber in the secondary learned to read cues from the quarterback's posture, his shoulder angle, the receiver's alignment, and first steps.
John Lynch, the safety.
He was trained to watch the QB's eyes, the subtle hand movements on the ball, to anticipate interceptions. Even guys like Simeon Rice and Ellis Wims on the D-line had practiced routines for different blocking schemes they'd see.
And it wasn't just defense, right? Even offensive players like Jeff Upshaw.
Absolutely. Upshaw was trained to focus on incredibly specific cues from the defender opposite him, the outside foot position, shoulder rotation, the spacing. They practiced reactions to these tiny cues over and over and over.
Until the response, the new routine became automatic.
Automatic, habitual. So when that specific cue appeared in a game, say, the offensive lineman leaning slightly forward, Sapp didn't have to think consciously, okay, he's likely pass blocking, I should use move X.
His body just reacted based on the drilled habit.
Precisely. His brain reacted almost instantly to the cue, triggering the practiced routine, allowing him to explode off the line much faster. Same for Lynch reading the QB for an interception.
And the reward stayed the same.
The reward was still making a great defensive play, stopping the opponent or making a key block on offense. So same cue, new, faster, more effective routine, same desired reward.
And it worked. The Bucs turned around dramatically.
Remarkably so. By reprogramming these on-field habits using the golden rule.
The book then draws this really interesting parallel between Dungy's coaching and Alcoholics Anonymous, calling AA basically a giant machine for changing habit loops. How does AA fit this model?
AA provides this highly structured environment where people struggling with alcohol addiction can first learn to identify their specific cues, what triggers the urge to drink. Stress, social situations, boredom, illness.
And also identify the rewards they're seeking from alcohol.
Exactly. And those rewards are often complex. It might be temporary stress relief, social connection, a feeling of escape, numbing pain, could be many things.
Okay, so identify cues and rewards. Then what?
Then AA offers a whole suite of new routines to substitute for drinking when those cues appear.
Like going to meetings.
Going to meetings, yes. Sharing personal stories, listening to others, calling your sponsor, working through the 12 steps. These are all new routines.
Designed to replace the drinking routine, but ideally provide some of the same rewards.
That seems to be the key. They aim to address the underlying cravings for connection, for coping mechanisms, for stress relief in healthier ways.
The book mentions some aspects of AA that seem a bit unconventional, like the 90 meetings in 90 days recommendation, or the strong focus on spirituality, even though the founder wasn't initially very religious, and no real professional therapists running the meetings.
Right, those elements might seem random, but they actually contribute significantly to the habit change process, often aligning with the golden rule.
How so? The 90 meetings.
That intense schedule creates a ton of new social cues and powerfully reinforces the new routine of attending meetings and sharing. It immerses the person in the new behavior pattern.
And the spirituality aspect.
Even defined broadly, belief in something greater than oneself. It can provide a crucial sense of hope, meaning, and a framework for coping. It might fulfill a deeper need, a reward perhaps, that alcohol was temporarily masking.
And the peer support.
That provides a huge social reward: acceptance, understanding, shared experience, accountability. It directly replaces some of the social rewards potentially sought through drinking.
So AA, maybe without explicitly using the scientific terms, stumbled upon a system that effectively swaps out the drinking routine while keeping cues and addressing rewards.
It appears that way. It aligns remarkably well with the core principles of habit change.
The book then talks about a more formalized therapy approach called habit reversal training. How does that work?
Habit reversal training is a more direct, structured therapy specifically designed to change unwanted habits by bringing conscious awareness to the loop.
So awareness first.
Awareness first. Identify the specific cues triggering the habit. Then pinpoint the reward you get from it.
Like Mandy, the nail biter in the book.
Exactly. Mandy had a chronic nail-biting habit. Therapy helped her become acutely aware of when and where she bit her nails. The cues.
And what she was feeling or thinking just before.
Right. She realized she often did it when bored or stressed. And the reward. The reward was a kind of physical, tactile stimulation. Something to do with her hands.
So identify cue, boredom, stress, and reward, physical stimulation. What's the reversal part?
The next step is developing and practicing a competing response. A new routine that's physically incompatible with the old habit, but provides a similar reward.
What did Mandy do?
She was taught that whenever she felt the urge to bite her nails, that craving for stimulation, she should immediately clench her fist tightly or sit on her hands.
Ah, so that provides physical stimulation, but you can't bite your nails if your fists are clenched.
Exactly. A competing response giving a similar reward. And Nathan Azrin, one of the pioneers of this therapy, said something really insightful.
What was that?
He said, once you're aware of how your habit works, once you recognize the cues and rewards, you're halfway to changing it.
Just the awareness itself is a huge step.
A massive step. And this technique, habit reversal training, has been successfully used for lots of things. Tax, smoking, gambling, anxiety habits, even some OCD-related behaviors.
It really underscores that we often run on these patterns without truly understanding the underlying drivers until we consciously look for them.
Absolutely.
Okay, shifting gears slightly. The book gets into the fascinating connection between belief and social habits in making significant changes stick. That data about alcoholics who believed in a higher power.
Yes, that was quite compelling. They found those individuals were more likely to stay sober through stressful periods.
What was the key takeaway there? Was it about specific religious beliefs?
Interestingly, the researchers suggested it wasn't necessarily about the specific doctrine or the exact nature of the higher power.
What was it then?
It seemed to be the act of believing itself, the capacity to have faith in something beyond their own immediate control, beyond their own willpower, perhaps. That belief acted as a powerful cognitive resource.
Like a buffer against stress or triggers.
It seems that way. Belief helped reinforce the new coping mechanisms and habits, especially when things got tough.
And the book connects this directly to the power of groups. Joining groups where change seems possible makes it more believable for you.
Precisely. When you surround yourself with people who are successfully making the change you want to make, it cultivates this powerful sense of possibility. It reinforces your own belief that you can do it too.
It makes the change feel real, attainable.
Exactly. The book notes that for many people who make major life changes, it's not usually some solo act of heroic willpower. It's the ongoing support, the shared experience, the collective belief within a community, whether that's one close friend or a whole support group, that makes the change feel sustainable.
Like psychologist Todd Heatherton said, change occurs among other people. It seems real when we can see it in other people's eyes.
A great quote, capturing that social reinforcement.
This leads right into the idea of the social habits of movements. The book breaks this down into 3 aspects: close tie habits, weak tie habits, and the overall role of community. Can you unpack those?
Sure. Close tie habits are about our strong personal connections, deep friendships, family bonds. These often provide the initial spark for social movements.
Like with Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott?
Exactly. Her extensive network of close friends felt a deep personal loyalty and outrage. They were among the first to spread the word and urge others to join the boycott, driven by those strong personal ties.
Okay, so that's close ties. What about weak tie habits?
Weak ties refer to our broader network acquaintances, colleagues, people we don't know as intimately. Mark Granovetter's famous concept, the power of weak ties, comes in here.
How do weak ties help movements?
While close friends provide initial momentum, it's often these weaker ties that allow information and influence to spread much more widely beyond the initial tight-knit group. It creates a sense of broader social obligation or peer pressure.
So my close friends might join because they care about me, but my colleague might join because they see everyone else joining and feel they should too.
Kind of, yes. It's that sense of shared community expectation that weak ties help propagate. Doug McAdams' research on the Freedom Summer volunteers really highlights this.
What did he find?
He found that people's existing social ties and the norms within their communities were actually stronger predictors of whether they'd participate in the risky Freedom Summer project than their individual political beliefs or even their assessment of the dangers.
Wow. So if you were in a community where civil rights activism was expected and valued, you were much more likely to volunteer.
Considerably more likely. The social pressure and community expectation, mediated through both close and weak ties, were incredibly powerful motivators.
And the third element, the role of community.
That's the overarching structure that supports and reinforces both types of social ties. It provides the infrastructure, the shared identity, the collective purpose that sustains a movement or a group effort over time.
The book uses A.D. Nixon getting Martin Luther King Jr. involved in the Montgomery boycott as an example here.
Right. Nixon, a seasoned activist, knew they needed strong community leadership. Bringing in King, a respected local pastor, was crucial. King's moral authority and the church's existing infrastructure provided a vital organizing hub and voice for the movement.
And Rick Warren at Saddleback Church.
His strategy deliberately used small groups, meeting regularly. This cultivated strong, close tie habits among members.
Embedding faith into daily life through relationships?
Exactly. By building these social habits within the church community, encouraging interaction and shared experience, he reinforced the desired beliefs and behaviors, making faith a more integrated, almost habitual part of their lives.
Okay, let's circle back now to those powerful initial examples. Lisa quitting smoking, the major in Kufa removing food vendors. The book calls these keystone habits. What makes a habit a keystone habit?
Keystone habits are certain core routines that, while they might seem specific or even small, trigger a cascade of other positive changes. They have a disproportionately large ripple effect.
They unlock other good habits.
Essentially, yes. They create a kind of foundation that makes other beneficial habits more likely to take root and flourish. Lisa quitting smoking wasn't just about smoking. It restructured her self-perception, her routines, leading to exercise, better eating, etc.
And the major in Kufa, removing food vendors seems so minor.
It seemed minor, but it disrupted established patterns of gathering and interaction that were, perhaps inadvertently, contributing to conflict and riots. Changing that one small thing shifted the dynamics, leading to more peace.
The book then gives that really surprising corporate example, Paul O'Neill at Alcoa focusing intensely on worker safety. That seemed totally counterintuitive for a new CEO talking to Wall Street.
Absolutely counterintuitive to the analysts at the time. They were expecting to talk about profits, cost-cutting, market share.
And instead, O'Neill talks about safety. What was the reaction?
Bewilderment, mostly. Skepticism. Some panic investors were like, what does safety have to do with the bottom line? Some apparently considered selling their stock right then and there.
They thought he was focused on the wrong thing.
Completely. They didn't see the connection.
But O'Neill's focus on safety did become a keystone habit for Alcoa, didn't it? It ended up improving everything, including profits.
Massively. His relentless focus on zero injuries forced the entire organization to rethink and redesign its core processes.
How did that work? Give an example.
Okay, say molten metal spills were causing injuries. To achieve zero injuries, Alcoa had to re-engineer the whole pouring system.
Which not only reduced injuries,
but also reduced expensive material waste and improved efficiency. Big cost savings.
Or if faulty equipment was unsafe,
it had to be replaced, which meant fewer accidents, yes, but also newer, better equipment often produced higher quality aluminum with fewer defects. Malfunctions were a major source of quality issues too.
So focusing on that one clear, morally compelling goal, safety, triggered improvements everywhere.
Exactly. Communication had to improve across departments to report potential hazards quickly. Training improved, processes became more standardized and efficient. Safety became the keystone that unlocked widespread operational excellence.
That initial small win of reducing injuries fueled bigger transformations.
Precisely. It created momentum and a shared framework for improvement.
The book also uses Michael Phelps and his coach Bob Bowman as an example of ingrained habits and mental prep.
Another great illustration. Bowman drilled Phelps relentlessly on core training routines. Performing perfectly executed strokes at race speed became almost automatic for Phelps.
Like muscle memory, but for complex swimming routines.
Deeply ingrained habit. Bowman's simple cue, get the videotape ready, would trigger this intense focus and practice routine.
And this preparation helped him during that disastrous goggle malfunction in the Olympics.
Hugely. His goggles filled with water right at the start of a crucial race. He was essentially swimming blind.
Which would panic most people.
But Phelps could rely on his ingrained habits, his stroke count per lap, his feel for the water, the rhythm he'd practiced thousands of times. He didn't panic.
And he won gold and set a world record.
Swimming blind. Those core training habits, honed over years, were the keystone that allowed him to overcome massive, unexpected adversity in the highest pressure situation imaginable.
That idea of small wins leading to bigger things, the American Library Association example seems tiny. Reclassifying some books.
It does seem tiny, doesn't it? Reclassifying books on gay liberation from a category including abnormal sexual relations to its own gay liberation movement category, a bureaucratic change.
Yeah, but it had ripple effects.
Big ones. It sent a powerful symbolic message. It created momentum. It contributed to shifting societal attitudes, influencing the American Psychiatric Association later to remove homosexuality from its list of mental illnesses. That paved the way for broader changes. Anti-discrimination laws, increased acceptance.
So even a seemingly tiny administrative win can challenge norms and create openings for larger transformations.
Exactly. These small wins demonstrate that change is possible and can build confidence for tackling bigger issues.
Okay, let's pivot to willpower. The book presents it not as this infinite virtue, but more like a muscle. It can get tired.
Right. That's the concept of ego depletion, largely pioneered by Roy Baumeister. His famous cookie experiment showed this really clearly.
Tell us about the cookies.
He had participants sit in a room with the tempting smell and sight of fresh chocolate chip cookies. Some were told they could eat radishes but had to resist the cookies. Others could eat the cookies.
Resisting cookies takes willpower.
Definitely. Afterwards, both groups were given a frustrating puzzle task designed to test persistence.
And the results.
The group that had resisted the cookies, who had already expended willpower, gave up on the puzzle significantly sooner than the group that hadn't had to resist.
Their willpower muscle was tired out.
That was the conclusion. And Mark Mervin's later research supported this. Using willpower in one area seems to temporarily reduce its availability for other tasks demanding self-control.
Which might explain why it's harder to stick to your diet after a really demanding day at work.
Or why a doctor might be slightly more prone to minor errors near the end of a long, complex surgery. Their self-regulatory capacity is depleted. Mervin said if you need willpower for something later, like that run after work, you need to try and conserve your willpower muscle earlier in the day.
So if I use all my willpower-resisting donuts at the office,
you might have less left in the tank to make yourself go to the gym later. It's a finite resource in the short term.
But the book also offers hope. It says willpower, like a muscle, can be strengthened with practice.
Exactly. And that's where the research by Oten and Cheng comes in. It's quite encouraging.
What did their studies show?
They had people engage in programs requiring regular self-discipline, like sticking to an exercise regimen or following a money management plan.
Okay, focusing willpower on one area.
Right. They found that participants not only got better at exercise or managing money, but they also showed improvements in other unrelated areas needing self-control.
Like what?
Like sticking to diets better, being more productive at work, even reducing smoking or drinking less.
So strengthening the willpower muscle in one domain spilled over into others.
It seemed to. Like exercising one muscle group makes your overall fitness improve somewhat. Todd Heatherton suggested this kind of training actually changes how people think, improving their basic ability to regulate impulses and focus on long-term goals.
And this idea is even being used in schools, like KIPP.
Yes, incorporating lessons and practices specifically designed to help students strengthen their self-control and perseverance their willpower muscles.
The book also stresses the importance of implementation intentions for making willpower stick. What are those?
Implementation intentions are basically very specific if-then plans for how you'll handle anticipated challenges or initiate desired behaviors.
So not just, I'll go to the gym more.
No, that's too vague,
Mm.
much less effective. An implementation intention would be, if it is Monday at 6 a.m., then I will immediately put on my workout clothes and drive to the gym for my planned 30-minute cardio session.
Much more specific, planning out the details.
Exactly. Even planning the mundane stuff, these detailed plans help automate the initial steps, reducing the amount of conscious willpower needed right in that moment of decision. You've already decided how you'll act when the situation arises.
Like the recovery patients in the book who wrote down detailed daily plans.
Yes, writing down exactly what they would do and when those specific plans significantly help them stay on track and resist falling back into old patterns, it shores up willpower by reducing the need for spontaneous effort.
Okay, let's loop back to the neurology of habits. We talked about Eugene and the basal ganglia showing habits can work independently of conscious memory. The book also briefly connects this to things like sleepwalking.
Right. It touches on how during some sleep disorders, like sleep terrors, the brain activity patterns look different from normal dreaming. They actually show similarities to the activity seen during automatic habitual behaviors.
Involving those central pattern generators.
Yes, those neural circuits in the brainstem and spinal cord that can generate rhythmic, automatic movements, walking, breathing, or potentially the complex actions seen in sleepwalking.
And the tragic case of Brian Thomas illustrates this danger.
A deeply disturbing case. A man with a history of sleepwalking who tragically killed his wife while asleep, apparently in response to a perceived threat in a nightmare. It highlights how these automatic, deeply ingrained behavioral patterns operating outside conscious control can sometimes manifest in extreme ways.
It's a profound reminder of the power these subconscious neurological processes hold. The book then brings in thinkers like Aristotle and William James.
Yes, grounding the modern science in historical wisdom. Aristotle believed our character is essentially the sum total of our habits. He stressed cultivating good habits from youth as the basis for a virtuous life.
And William James, the psychologist.
He famously called life a mass of habits, emphasizing their huge role in shaping who we become. He personally struggled with habits like procrastination.
And he did that year-long experiment on himself.
Yeah, deliberately choosing to believe he had the free will to change his patterns, despite feeling predetermined by them. His own experience highlighted how powerful belief can be in starting the change process.
So we've covered the science, the theory, the examples. Now, for you listening, how can you actually start identifying and changing your own habits? The book gives some practical steps.
It does. The first crucial step is to really identify the habit loop for the specific behavior you want to change.
Break it down into cue, routine, reward.
Exactly. Start by observing the routine. What exactly do you do? When does it happen? Where are you? Be specific.
Okay, observe the routine.
Then you need to experiment with rewards. This is key. When you feel the urge, the craving for the old routine, try substituting different actions or outcomes after the routine, or instead of it.
Why experiment?
To figure out what reward you're actually craving. Are you grabbing that cookie at 3 p.m. because you're hungry? Or are you bored, stressed, need a break, seeking social interaction?
So try eating an apple instead. Does that satisfy the urge? Try chatting with a colleague. Try stretching.
Precisely. By consciously trying different potential rewards, you can isolate the true underlying craving that's fueling that specific habit loop.
Okay, identify routine, experiment with rewards. What's the third step?
Isolate the cue. This can sometimes be tricky. The book suggests things like the 5 whys technique, keep asking why, to dig down to the root trigger.
Or just meticulous logging.
Yes, that's often very effective. Every time the habit occurs, jot down specific details. Where are you? Location. What time is it? Time. What's your emotional state?
Right.
Emotional state. Who else is around? Other people. And what action immediately preceded the urge? Preceding action.
Location, time, emotional state, other people, preceding action. Track those 5 things.
Over time, patterns in those logs will likely emerge, revealing the consistent trigger, the cue for that habit. It might be more subtle than you think. The book mentions a psychologist analyzing subtle cues in witness interviews. It's about noticing those often unconscious triggers.
And the book wraps up with this really empowering message about awareness.
Yes. Back to Nathan Azrin's point. Becoming consciously aware of your habit loop The cue, the routine, the reward is often halfway to changing it.
Just understanding how it works gives you power over it.
Exactly. Once you understand the mechanics, you realize these habits, however ingrained they feel, aren't your destiny. They aren't immutable. You gain the insight that you can intervene, you can consciously reshape these loops to better serve your goals and values.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the big takeaways from our deep dive today. We've explored the fundamental habit loop: cue, routine, reward.
And the absolutely critical role of craving in driving that loop.
We learned Tony Dungy's golden rule: keep the cue and reward, but swap in a new routine.
We discussed the powerful influence of belief and social connections, both in AA and broader movements.
We unpacked the concept of keystone habits, those small changes with big ripple effects, like O'Neill's focus on safety at Alcoa or Lisa quitting smoking.
We looked at willpower as a muscle, something that gets tired but can also be strengthened with practice and supported by implementation intentions.
And finally, we covered the practical steps you can take to analyze your own habits. Identify the routine, experiment with rewards, and isolate the cue.
Exactly. And for you listening, we really hope this detailed exploration of the science provides a powerful framework.
Yeah, something that moves you beyond just feeling stuck or overwhelmed by habits you don't like.
It offers a clear, evidence-based path for thinking about deliberate personal growth and actually achieving the changes you want to make.
So now that you have this deeper, more nuanced understanding of how habits work, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Think about your own life. What is one seemingly small, maybe even insignificant routine you have?
That if you were to consciously shift it, just slightly, using these principles,
Might unexpectedly unlock a whole cascade of other positive changes you haven't even considered yet.
take some time to reflect on your own habits. Consider the potential that lies in deliberate, informed change.
Thank you for joining us at Wisdom House, where we bring you timeless insights from the greatest books. If you found this deep dive valuable, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Wisdom House. Stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next